We're here with Eric Yollick, and he's running for judge of the 9th Judicial District Court. And with me is Bob Bagley, Del Fessington, and Ken Vaughn. And with that, Eric, I'll turn it over to you for your opening. And
thanks, John. Okay, my name is Eric Yollick, and I've lived in Montgomery County for 23 years. I'm a native Texan. I was born in the northern part of Texas, in a town called Dallas, and that's where I grew up. I am running for the 9th District Court, which is going to be an open seat, and it is right now, it's actually a general jurisdiction court as set forth by the legislature in the government code. Because of the just preference of the current judge, Kelly Case, it only hears criminal cases right now. And that court has had some significant problems that are, some are part probably due to the way that Judge Case has done some things, and some of them have been due to others, quite frankly. But you know, we have a serious problem in the Montgomery County Courthouse, and one of the big themes of my campaign is I want to make Texas courthouses great again. And they need it. They really need reform. And let me just back up for a second. In 2003, I was living a fairly quiet life, and I got a phone call from a very, very liberal lady who I knew and who was a friend. And she was in tears, and I was actually sitting in the emergency room at MD Anderson Cancer Center at the time. And she told me that there was a vacancy on the hospital district board and that they couldn't fill it, and that she knew there would be a problem because there were 3 liberals on the board and 3 conservatives. And the hospital district at that time was just a total mess. Thank you. And so after a bunch of going back and forth, the liberals generally decided that I was their man, even though when they interviewed me, I made it very clear I'm probably going to be the most conservative member of the hospital district board that you've ever seen, and we're going to reform this thing like lightning speed. And the liberals knew that I was lying. The conservatives knew that I was lying because they didn't believe a word of the fact that I could possibly be a conservative, because I had been the lawyer for the liberals for the last few years. And so by a 3 votes in favor, 2 votes against, and 1 abstention vote, I was appointed to the hospital district board. And it was quite a fast ride. At my first board meeting, I introduced a resolution to cut the budget basically across the board by 20%. We immediately canceled a mobile medical clinic program. I had practically every doctor in Montgomery County, especially the ones who were getting all these subsidies, come to a board meeting and tell me what a bad guy was. I remember there were 3 doctors, and I'm not going to mention their names, but they were almost in tears. One of them actually was in tears, and he said that I ruined his life because he wasn't going to be getting these subsidies from the hospital district. And so I was on the board for 3 years. In August of 2006, we passed our budget. We set our tax rate at the lowest rate in the history of the hospital district. And I felt like my work was done. And quite frankly, it's not my life ambition to be in government service. There's a lot of things I love doing. And so I resigned from the board 15 minutes after the board meeting adjourned, and I haven't looked back. I believe that I need to do the same thing with our courthouses. Our courthouses are inefficient. We don't get the job done. The law is not being enforced. Judges don't follow the Constitution. Judges are playing politics in the courtroom intensely, and that's a major issue in this race for the 9th District Court. And I want to tell you something. I'm not in the criminal industry. And I hope that you'll ask me some questions about that, because I think that's a major issue in this race. So that's why I think that it's important that I run for the 9th Judicial District, and that's why I would like your vote, please.
All right, thanks very much. So Kelly Case is not running again.
Correct.
And do you feel like that is gonna clear up most of the issues that have been, as you described in this court?
No, it won't. It'll clear up some of them. Judge Case, has a preference for criminal cases. I think that if we only have criminal cases in that court, we're not following the law, which is set by the legislature, for it to be hearing all of those cases. The dockets of that court need to be doubled so that we actually move cases so it receives the same number of criminal cases, and then you also receive your fair share of civil and family cases, and so you can help the other courts out and move the docket along. And yeah, that's not the right time. I thought I'd only get 2 minutes for an answer. Oh, now I get it. Wow, extra time. So since I have extra time, let me tell you what I'd do. I would hold court 5 days a week from 8 to 6. I would have motion dockets from 8 to 9, from 12 to 1, and from 5 to 6. I would have jury trials from 9 to 12 and from 1 to 5. I'd be on the bench the entire time. I have to admit I probably have to go to the bathroom once in a while, but I would work 10 hours a day on the bench and probably 2 to 3 hours a day looking at files so that I'd be prepared for motions and trials, which, by the way, is something that you rarely see judges do. I would work 50 to 51 weeks a year, and I would also do one other thing which has gotten almost nothing but criticism for the fact that I said that I will do this, but I will do it anyway, and that's just tough. And that is that I'm a big believer that government service should not be something that people make a lot of money off of. And so I will return half of my salary to the taxpayers if I'm elected to this position. And I can explain why, but that's sort of the efficiencies. Now, the district judges have some other functions, they have some administrative functions, and I will follow those functions in the most hyperactive way that you have seen a judge in this county perform those functions. But as far as following the law and avoiding being an activist judge, I'll certainly do that.
Okay, great.
Well, that was a lot to take in and know where to start. You touched some things that are a big concern to me. We all know that elected officials don't have to put in any time at all, really. A judge has to put in more than any other elected official, but the majority of our judges don't put in a 40-hour week. You look at the courthouse on Fridays, and it's hard to find a judge usually on Fridays or in the mornings or other times. I wouldn't expect you to be putting in an 80-hour week. If you're putting in a 60-hour week, then your personnel are going to have to be working as well if you're on the bench.
On the bench, yeah.
Right. I'm not looking for you to go overboard. I just want our elected officials to earn the money that they're getting. And along with that, if you're giving back half of your pay, that pay really will never make it back to the taxpayers. It'll end up back in Commissioner's Court for them to spend however they so desire.
There a question there? Did you start the timer?
So
We have to put them on the clock.
how do we, you're talking about giving it back to the taxpayers. How would that be possible because of the way the system is set up?
I just won't accept the money. Either they will have to, first of all, there's one way, easy way to do it is just take every other paycheck and the money just stays with them. Another way is to write them a check back. It's going to happen, Bob, okay? Now, I wanted to say one thing, though. There's something that I really strongly disagree with that you just said, and that is that you don't expect judges to go overboard. I do. You know, it's a very nice job to have. It shouldn't really be such a nice job to have, but the truth is that government service should be a sacrifice. It should be where you're putting in your time to help the community, and you know, you're going away from your own perhaps occupation, and you have to spend that much time doing it. And basically I did that when I was on the hospital district board.
Right.
And you know, the pay there was zero. No, I think that that's what you do. And the problem, though, is that we've set up all these systems so that this is now one of the cushiest jobs in the world. This is your retirement job. This is the job that, you know, people want. I want to become a judge, you know, is what people say, so that they can get all the benefits of the county, and they're on the health insurance. And you know, I've heard stories that the incumbent judge spent several weeks away from the county when he first became a judge in 2013 because he finally got some really good health insurance, and so he had some treatment. And I don't know if that's true or not, but you do certainly hear stories like that, and that's wrong. You know, when I was on the hospital district board, I didn't take benefits, and there were some benefits. I wouldn't even sit in the big leather chairs in the boardroom, really. I sat on a metal chair when they were sitting next to me in their big leather ones. That's the way government service should be.
Okay, you made some broad statements that, you know, no courts are efficient, no courts, whatever. Are there any good points to any of the existing courts in Montgomery County? Can you cite any good points?
Yeah, I hope I didn't say no courts are efficient. First of all, I think County Court of Law number 3, which is Judge McDonald. Now, I haven't been to her court for a little while, but my impression is she works pretty hard. I mean, she's in that courthouse 5 days a week, all day long. As you observed, Bob, it's really not just on Fridays. Friday is certainly a ghost town, but it is many afternoons a week. The court's doors are locked and the lights are turned out. And that tells you something right there, that, you know, all these judges saying, oh, well, you know, we've got to specialize these courts and, you know, make them more efficient. And I'd like to talk about that maybe later, but the reality is that if the judges just worked full time, we would have a very different, we'd have a lot less money that we're spending on the jail. We'd probably not need as many judges, quite frankly. And you know, there might be other cost savings as well. So you know, there are some really good people in the Montgomery County Courthouse. There are some people who probably need to work a little bit harder.
Okay.
Currently, there is a significant backlog we've heard about in criminal cases. Like 20% of cases that come up every year don't get heard, they're deferred, and that backlog is just building up right now. In the meantime, the civil cases are being heard. So how do you move the current court away from that criminal focus into more of a civil focus without making that criminal backlog even worse?
First of all, you don't. I want to be clear. I'm not going to reduce the number of criminal cases that go through the 9th District Court. I want the same docket. So the number of criminal cases that are currently assigned need to continue to be assigned, you know, both in terms of percentage and gross number, or maybe even a larger gross number. What I'm saying is that I will do a civil and family docket in addition to those, and I absolutely guarantee to you that I will move that docket and I will clear the backlog, at least the part that the 9th District Court is responsible for. Now, after I do that, then if other courts want to send the 9th some of their backlog cases, I'll certainly do that. And I'll tell you something, I will make an absolute guarantee that I'll do that, that I will clear the backlog Because if I don't, I won't take a salary at all. I'm not worth a penny. That's my job. And by the way, let me tell you, I want to mention, I've got 58 seconds, so I want to tell you something. One of the interesting things that I've run into, I've been thinking about whether or not I should run for judge, and I really didn't make a decision to do it until this past Sunday, which is why I filed on Monday. But I found that it is very hard to get statistics from the Office of Court Administration in Montgomery County. They will not release the information. The judges have instructed Nate not to give the information out, and that's just plain weird. And I think it's, a violation of Texas law. Now, what's interesting though is that if you really dig around and you go to the Texas Office of Court Administration, which I have done, you can actually get the numbers. And those numbers are telling. We really do have a backlog, and it's growing by at least 1,000 cases in each of the categories each year, and that's a problem. I like that.
Good to me. What makes you the most qualified in this race, knowing who your opponents are now? And you came in on the last day, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know your opponents, I'm sure, quite well. What makes you the most qualified over them?
Okay, several things. First of all, I have been practicing law for 26 years. I'm board certified in consumer and commercial law. I'm very familiar with evidence and procedure. I'm probably the only candidate in this race who has a good knowledge of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, the Family Code, and the Texas Rules of Civil Procedure. I've noticed that criminal lawyers generally are not quite as strong on the rules of evidence and procedure as civil attorneys are often. Now that's not, I'm not trying to be specific about either of my opponents, but I have noticed that. I think that the fact that I'm not in the criminal industry makes a huge difference. One of my opponents is a prosecutor, and he also makes known that he's very proud of the fact that he has been involved in civil asset forfeitures, which I think is contrary to a lot of things, but one thing I know it's contrary to is my philosophy, and it's contrary to the state Republican Party platform, actually, even. And so I find that very, and I'd love to talk to you all about civil asset forfeitures, so I hope you ask me about them. I want to mention, my other opponent is a criminal defense lawyer. She makes her living off of the criminal industry. I'll come in and I won't represent the criminals or the accused, and I won't represent the prosecutor, because there's a big feud going on between those two groups right now. I'll represent the citizens and I'll enforce the law, which is what a judge should be doing, and so I'm independent. And so that really is the main thing that makes me qualified, and probably the most qualified for this position.
Okay, great.
Well, I'll go after the civil asset forfeiture then. I've been involved with Waco and the incident up there where the bikers had all of their assets seized.
Okay.
They've not had any convictions yet. None of them have gone to trial. All of their things were seized and sold. Their cars, their motorcycles, their motorhomes, you name it. That's prior to trial. To me, that's illegal. I don't believe we do that here in this county. I know we do a lot of civil asset forfeitures, but I don't think we're selling off the assets until after convictions. And I may be wrong. But I still have a problem with the entire thing, with the civil asset forfeiture. So,
Okay.
What is your feeling on that?
First of all, I totally agree with the dissenting opinion in LLE versus State, in which 3 Supreme Court justices, it was written by Justice Willett, Justice Devine joined with him, and I forgot who the 3rd justice was. That opinion came out last year, and they said that the civil asset forfeiture system as we now have it is unconstitutional. both under the federal and the Texas Constitution. I don't know for sure that I would rule that way necessarily. However, I do agree with their opinion. Now, here's the problem with civil asset forfeitures. It's really three things. Number one, they shouldn't be civil. What that means is the burden of proof for an asset forfeiture is by a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt. So you could actually be convicted of, or you could be acquitted of a crime and still lose your assets under a civil asset forfeiture. Okay? That's problem number one. Problem number two is that the law in Texas now, which is in Chapter 59 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, says that the law enforcement agency gets the profits from the forfeiture. So basically, you're incentivizing the law enforcement officials to go as far as they can to seize property. They're not worried, their priority is not the Constitution and the rights of people or doing the right thing. They've got a profit motive. And the third thing is that there just are not enough controls over what they're allowed to do with the money. And so it has set up a terrible system in this state. Now, the problem is, it is the law. You know, you say it's illegal, Bob, but I mean, the problem is that that is the law in Texas that our legislature has enacted.
Just seems unconstitutional.
It certainly does.
No.
Okay, your background is primarily, maybe exclusively civil. This court had been primarily criminal, and you've cited in a recent answer that neutrality or that lack of background there in that discipline of law is what makes you one of the best candidates, maybe the best candidate. What do you see as the shortcomings of not having as much experience in those other aspects of the law?
None. Let me tell you why.
Please do.
First of all, to be a civil lawyer, you've got to know the rules of evidence backwards and forwards, at least the way that I practice civil law. And so that is something, you know, the rules of evidence for civil and criminal are the same. There's a few provisions in the rules that only apply to civil, or only apply to criminal, I'm sorry. And then a few in the other way as well. So that's one major strength that a civil lawyer has going into the criminal realm as a judge. My practice has been primarily representing businesses. And once in a while, businesses are accused of white-collar crimes. Once in a while, they are subject to civil forfeiture proceedings. And there have been many instances in my career, in fact, I'm involved in one right now, a pretty big one, where business people have to face these issues and they need to rely upon my knowledge of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. So I don't think there are shortcomings to the background that I've had. No, I'm not saying that, and I mean from a law perspective. I mean, look, everybody's had, you know, mistakes and problems in their lives. When I ran for judge in 1996, I probably was not qualified. I was too young. I hadn't been knocked around enough by the world. And now, you know, 20 years later, it's kind of funny, I'm actually the old man in the race. And I think that it actually puts me in a much stronger position because now, you know, I can certainly empathize with lawyers in the courtroom, prosecutors in the courtroom, the litigants in civil, family, and criminal cases. And that's what a judge should be. You know, a judge needs to follow the law, but you need to treat people well no matter who they are.
Okay.
We're almost a half hour into it, and it's a little bit over 15 minutes left.
So let's say a family has a daughter and they end up taking the daughter to the doctors and roll them in the hospital, and they have some disease, they don't figure out what's happening. Some other experts come in. Those experts describe a course of action that the parents disagree with. And they involve CPS. CPS comes with you, with the doctors, saying, if we don't do this, the child's going to die, and the parents are objecting to it. So who wins that case?
Well, let me answer. I'm going to answer it, but I'm going to give you the cautionary word that you know I'm about to say, which is under the Judicial Conduct Code, I can't give you how I would actually rule in that case, okay? But here's what I certainly, and by the way, I will say this though, that if I could answer the question, I have a funny feeling you'd like my answer, okay? All right. So, and by the way, I don't think your timer is operating. But basically, here's what you need to understand, or at least I need to tell you so that you'll know. I'm a big believer in the law, and the law in this country is set forth by the constitutions. And the Constitution that we have in the United States has a right to liberty and the pursuit of happiness. There was a wonderful opinion that was written by Justice McReynolds in 1923 that says that a fundamental aspect of liberty that was explicitly contemplated by the Founding Fathers was the right to raise your children and to deal with your children in the manner in which you see fit. Now, you can't sexually abuse them, you can't beat them up, but outside of those things, parents should have the right to raise and deal with their children. That's their right. That is a right of liberty.
Okay.
I didn't even need 2 minutes, but
Well, how about a short follow-on to that, since you've got, what about cases where parents have objection to transfusions, blood transfusions based on religious grounds or something like that, and that would cost the life of the child?
well, first of all, unfortunately, I have to tell you the same thing, that I can't, tell you exactly how I rule in every case. But, once again, a parent has the right to raise their child the way that they want to raise them. And, it would have to be a pretty extreme circumstance to overcome that rule.
Okay. What about the case of vaccinations where it may impact other children?
I just hear so many crazy things about this vaccination issue, to be quite honest, and it's really crazy. And I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it is a fundamental aspect of liberty that parents should be allowed to raise their children the way they want to. Now, does that mean that they can send a sick child to school? No, obviously not. And that's the way that you deal with that problem. It's not through a vaccination.
Okay.
In question number 9, you'd indicated, the question was, what are the top 3 areas where the budget for this office needs to be adjusted? And in one of your answers, you had indicated that citizens should serve in public office to accomplish limited goals during a limited time. Do you favor term limits, and for how long? And how long would you serve?
No, I'm sorry. I do not favor term limits. My intention is to serve for 4 years. That's how long the term is. The reason I don't favor term limits is I think that the problem is that government has become this massive thing where everybody wants to have a government paycheck because it's the benefits are wonderful, the salaries are higher than the average salaries even in private industry now. What you're seeing in this county is that the amount that judges make is more than a lot of the attorneys make, and so it's a very desirable job. I mean, I don't know what exactly, I know I've seen the numbers of how much a prosecutor makes, but I mean, I know that if you go from being a prosecutor to being a judge, you get a big pay raise. That's the way you have term limits, is you don't make government this wonderful place to be. You go there to sacrifice. It's like the guys who were in Congress in the 19th century. They weren't making $200,000 a year. They were getting a stipend for travel and expenses. And so the other problem, though, and let me tell you why I don't like term limits. I'll give you two examples. Number one, President Reagan. If President Reagan had been 20 years younger, why in the world would you want to limit that man to 2 terms? I mean, what he did just in the international relations realm was just amazing. And so that's one example. The other example that I have given people is, what if the bullet didn't actually hit President Lincoln? Well, I mean, that would have been the right guy to bring his compassion and love and kindness to try to heal this country after the Civil War. We wouldn't want to term limit someone like that out.
We'll come back to that. Bob?
I just had it and I just lost it.
Bob, let me ask mine and then come back to Bob.
Yeah, I started writing it and got it.
That's okay.
Sidetracked.
Focus on that. One of the controversial topics in law circles is jury nullification. So would you please tell us your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think juries certainly have the right to perform nullification. I mean, that's clear. I mean, the judge is supposed to, and really is required by law, to instruct the jury what the law is and instruct the jury to follow the law. If the jury goes back into the jury room and nullifies, then so be it. That's their verdict. That's it. That's my feeling about jury nullification.
Okay. You got your question in, Bob?
I do. A couple of my favorite judges were Judge Devine, John Devine, and Judge Ted Pope. And one of the things that both of them did that I really liked was their sentences. As a judge, you've got a broad spectrum of things that you can do. I liked the idea of humiliating people for their actions, not just jail time, but making the public aware what they did. The billboard, the sandwich sign, saying I fought the law and the law won, or I beat my wife, I'll never do it again type thing, and standing on the street corner for hours. Another thing that one of the judges did, and I think it's absolutely fantastic, I wish everybody did it, but on the corner of 1314 and 3080, or 336, there's 3 crosses there. A teenager, not paying attention, wasn't on his cell phone, ran a red light and killed 3 people. Those 3 crosses are sitting there, and he's responsible every month to make sure that all of that area around there is groomed and it's clean. If he doesn't do it, then he's going back to jail. We have a number of people, drunk drivers and others that have killed people, and it destroys lives. Making them pay for something outside of that, making this be a constant reminder every day they go by it, is something I think needs to be done more of. And how do you feel about going outside of the box for sentencing people?
I'm totally with that idea. Back in the time frame of about 97 to about 2001, there was a general jurisdiction court judge in this county who did a lot of that type of sentencing. And what he would often do, and he always seemed to pick on me, is he would have civil lawyers sitting in his courtroom waiting for motion hearings, and he would say, Mr. Yollick, come up to the bench, please. And he's in the middle of sentencing someone, and he'd say, this is, so-and-so, I'd like for you to meet with him 2 hours a week, and if possible, maybe even give him a part-time job in your office where he'll be working as a volunteer, and, you know, here are the conditions of what I want you to do and what I want you to talk with him. Are you willing to do that? And I think he did that with me 3 times. I believe, you know, I can't speak for the defendant, but it certainly was a great experience for me. And I took it very seriously and really enjoyed the experience. And with one of those people, I still see them all the time, get phone calls from him. I think it changed his life. I mean, that's what he's told me. So, yeah, I mean, you can do some real, there are people who you can do that with, Bob. But I'll tell you this, I mean, there are also some people that, you know, all of those actions are just a complete waste of breath and time of the criminal justice system, and you need to punish them and send them to prison.
Right.
And you know, judges need to evaluate people based on the evidence that is put before them.
And it's not necessarily always the factual evidence, but it's your observation, and when the case is being presented, you end up knowing about the individual as well, and that's, again, goes back to philosophy of being there for the individuals.
And that takes time, and that's why judges should be spending 10 hours a day at least. And, you know, even more than that, because you ought to be looking at sentencing reports, you know, and I mean, you know, that's why we have the people prepare those detailed pre-sentencing reports, is so that judges have an opportunity to get to know people as well as possible.
We got about 2 minutes left, I think. 2 more time around. Deb.
Well, okay, we had reversed.
Oh, that's right, y'all reversed Ken, sorry.
Okay,
I'll take that.
so, quick question and a follow-up. So, which is more important, the original Constitution, laws, and/or precedents? What's the order of importance in those in your rulings?
Constitution.
Okay. And then, which second of those 3?
Well, I mean, first of all, it depends. What do you mean?
So there's Constitution, law, and
Case law.
Precedent,
President, yeah.
judicial precedent.
I think in almost every instance that I'd ever consider, I mean, first of all, it's statutory. The precedent is the Constitution, then the statute, and then case law.
So if that's true, then what happens when someone comes in with a conviction, say they're been arrested for having a weapon on them, and they don't have a concealed weapon permit? Now, the Constitution says it shall not be infringed. They're not criminals, they're allowed to have a gun, but they didn't have a concealed weapon permit, and they were found with a weapon.
Okay, so once again, you get the same old disclaimer. I can't tell you how to actually rule in a case, okay? All right, so now we've done that. And by the way, I didn't get my full 2 minutes. But the answer to that question is that you do have to evaluate what, first of all, is his right to bearing arms being infringed? If you have, you know, for example, he violates an exemption under the statute, or if he, you know, for example, you could say, all right, well, he has the right to bear arms, but he just can't conceal it. All right, I mean, that really is the law in Texas, and unless you have a CHL, which I do, but the reality is that there are some, what I would almost call, and it's really more of a First Amendment type answer, you can restrict speech, for example. You can have reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions of speech. They have to be reasonable, though, and they have to serve a real purpose. And it's the same thing with the Second Amendment. I mean, there are certain reasonable restrictions that you can make. I think it is reasonable for someone not to walk in with a fully automatic weapon into an elementary school, for for example. You know, you don't have the right to bear that arm in an elementary school. But, you know, that's a reasonable restriction. That doesn't mean that the person can't own a weapon. It just means that there's certain places where they can't do certain things with it. And that's where I kind of draw the distinction.
Okay.
Term limits, back to.
You said you were coming back.
Yeah. So Lincoln could possibly have gone more than 2 terms. Like they wanted Washington to do. They wanted him to be a king. FDR actually went 4 terms. Do you think that was, and they changed that? I don't think his body was cold before the legislature changed that law to make it 2 terms. Do you think it should be left up to the people, or do you think they were right to put the 2-term limit in for POTUS? And should that be extended to other offices as well?
I do not support term limits, I'm sorry.
Even at presidential level?
And you know, I want to go back to your first example of Lincoln, okay? Great example. There's a guy who was not a rich man, and he probably would not have served more than 2 terms. He didn't like it. And that's the key to it, is I did not like being on the hospital district board. I didn't like it from the first moment I was on the board until the time I resigned. I was trying to get the job done and get out of there, and that's what you've got to do, is you've got to make it so that, you know, elected officials should not be a special class of people. You know, I went to a bar luncheon a couple of years ago, and there was, you know, and there were like 10 round tables at the Lone Star Convention Center. And all the judges sat at one table, and they filled up the chairs, and no one else could sit with them. You had to be a judge, I guess, to sit at that table. They were a special group of people. And then all of the plebeians got to sit at the other tables. That's not the way the world should operate. That's not the way the government should be. And if you don't make that special class so that elected officials are, you know, these high people, you know, and it's like the heavens opening, you know, and you hear music in the background in the clouds when they walk into the room. If you don't have that, then people aren't going to have the incentive. They're going to be making sacrifices, which is what public service should be. And then you don't need term limits. And that's what you've got to do, is get rid of those incentives.
Well, isn't that, in all due respect, kind of naive? Because if you get into any type of political situation, whether it's, well, not as much a precinct chair level, but maybe a JP level to the president, then the iron triangle comes into effect when you have incumbency. You're familiar with the iron triangle?
No.
Politicians, wallets, movers and shakers. Wallets being lobbyists at the federal and state level, developers, engineers, contractors at the local level. It's kind of tough to break that, you know.
I can break in a heartbeat. Don't pay the JP. If the Justice of the Peace is serving as a volunteer, you think he's going to want to do it for the next 30 years?
Yeah, but they're getting paid, right?
No, he's serving as a volunteer.
Okay.
Volunteer means you don't get paid.
No. Okay, but any other level above that, commissioner.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. Well,
Cut their pay.
That's right. You cut their pay. I mean, these guys are, and sorry to the timer,
No, keep going.
but I mean, the reality is these guys are making a fortune. You know, there are people who have served as county commissioner in this county that if they weren't the county commissioner making, you know, well over $100,000 a year with just an incredible travel allowance, they would be probably making $25,000 a year in a construction job. And so,
Highest paid in the state, in
Well,
Montgomery County.
yeah, I mean, I didn't know that, but I mean, you know, that tells you right there. So, you know, the way to burst open your triangle is let's just get rid of that top apex right there, and then you don't have to worry about it.
But since they make the rules, that ain't gonna happen.
Well, the people who ought to make the rules are the legislature. And the legislature certainly could, and by the way, I'm glad you said that, because now my 2 minutes starts again, but I won't use it all.
No.
But, no, but let me tell you.
Yeah, we probably ought to get into your closing.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say though is that, you know, John, apparently you and I do disagree on term limits, and I'm sorry, I'm not gonna back down, but the good news for you is that even if I win, a judge of the Ninth District Court really has nothing to do with deciding what the term limit laws are. Except that I will follow term limits, and I'm going to follow a term limit of 1.
Yeah, well, that was my primary question. So
Yeah.
with that, why don't you jump into your closing, and if you like, up to 5 minutes.
Wow. I don't really think I need 5 minutes. And what I mean by that is that y'all really have asked good questions, and I've gotten to say what I wanted to say. You know, by the way, the piece of paper that's in front of me are the statistics that I pulled from the Texas Office of Court Administration, if you'd like to look at them, about how the dockets are falling behind in this county. Actually, there is one thing that I want to talk about. You know, one of the big issues in this race is this whole issue of whether or not courts should specialize. There have been a lot of studies on this issue, and almost every single study comes to the, and of course, you know who does the studies, it's the judges and the courts, and they all conclude that we need specialization. Now, they don't really say that they can look at numbers and say that specialization makes any difference. But I mean, I even looked at a study a couple mornings ago that was about 180 years old. It was done in the United Kingdom, where they decided that they needed to have specialized criminal courts in order to be more efficient. Well, I mean, the reality is that I don't think that makes any difference. I think that if a judge knows the law and decides to follow the law, that, you know, and if they're organized and set up dockets, so, you know, for example, you do your criminal docket this morning, you do your family docket from 12 to 1, or you set up when your various dockets are, then as long as the judge is organized, the docket is going to move. I think one of the real advantages of having a general jurisdiction court is a few things. First of all, you're likely going to have a judge who can handle every case that comes in. You know, I've gone to some of the judges who are specialized judges, not even in this county necessarily, but other counties, and asked them, okay, you're the only judge in the courthouse right now, and you have a criminal district court. Can you grant my temporary restraining order? My client really needs it. And the judge has no idea what the standards are under the law for granting a temporary restraining order. That's a real problem. But I think that the other thing that having a court of general jurisdiction does is that it keeps the judge fresher. It makes the courtroom more interesting to the judge. The judge is more engaged. And while you don't want an activist judge, actually, someone asked me a question, I thought it was a great question. Is there a difference between an activist judge and an engaged judge? And my answer was yes, period. And that's exactly the same question that I tell clients when they come in to prepare for a deposition. I ask them the question, do you know your name? And I'd say 60% of them say, yeah, my name's John Smith. And I tell them, you didn't answer the question correctly. It's a yes or no question. Do you know your name? Period. Yes, period. No, period. And that's how engaged you've got to be when you give a deposition, okay? Well, it's the same thing. I think the judge needs to be fully engaged in the court, in all the proceedings of the courts, like what you were talking about, Bob. You know, how you judge what is the appropriate sentence for someone who has been convicted of a crime. Well, if the judge isn't engaged, there's no way that the judge is going to impose the appropriate sentence. And so you've got to be engaged. And I think having a general jurisdiction court helps that. But, you know, this whole issue of specialization versus general jurisdiction you know, my opponents, they want specialization because they're in the criminal industry. But we've already, it's not even a question that's up to us at this point. It's been decided. The law is that the 9th District Court is a general jurisdiction court. And so if you're going to elect a judge who's going to follow the law, I mean, something as basic as that, let's start by at least making this the court that it's supposed to be. As opposed to, I mean, if you're saying, okay, I'm going to follow the law, but we're going to disregard the legislative law on what this court's supposed to be, not a very good start in following the law. So anyway, I think that's an important issue, and I think that it's the reason that I am the appropriate candidate for the 9th District Court, and I ask for your vote on March the 1st, and for your endorsement, please.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate you
Thanks.
coming in.
Great.